Welcome back to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. I'm excited to share this story with you, so let's dive in. Welcome back to Between the Before and After. It is my pleasure to be hosting Kathleen Houston today. And Kathy has quite a story. I learned a new term when Kathy sent a request to be a guest on my show. That term is Lily. And Kathy's going to define that for us. And we're going to learn a little bit more about her journey and how she got to where she is today. So welcome to the show, Kathy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, before we dive into your story, which is quite a unique journey here, or maybe it's not so unique because you help other women in this process here. In a previous chat, I've learned that you're also a coach, but you introduced me to this term Lily, and I wonder if we could define what Lily is.
Lily is a late in life lesbian, and it doesn't have to be really late in life, like 40s, 50s, or whatever. In my case, it was 40s and 50s. It can be somebody who just doesn't realize it when they're younger and going through puberty and high school, and they go into their 20s in one direction and realize they want to go in a different direction later on in life. Okay. So that's what late in life lesbian is.
Okay, fascinating. And this for you happened in your mid to late 40s, if I understand correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we're going to dive a little more into that. Before we do, I wanted to just give people a little snapshot of where you are right now and what it is that you're currently working on.
I am currently a life coach. I help mature women in health, fitness, and also relationships. I also am a Beachbody coach, and I use that as part of the health and fitness platform to get our mindset energies right, manage ourselves, our minds, our states, and be better people for everybody else.
You know, and I think health coaching itself is really fascinating. So I've been in this world for about 8 years, and I've seen sort of the evolution of it. Even like in today's modern technology-driven world, like things change very, very rapidly. And so there's a lot of change that has taken place in this space. And I would think the biggest shift that has taken place in this space is the level of kind of like self-awareness and just our consciousness around our health. You know, before we were recording, we talked a little bit about our medical system and kind of the way that it's set up. And we were chatting a little bit about differences between Canada and the US. But more importantly, about the importance of someone becoming their own best advocate. And now with the advent of the internet and the access to information that we have, it opens the door to us being much more effective advocates for our health, and almost out of necessity, because I feel as though, and maybe you might be able to reflect this sentiment as well, but there was this idea, maybe even in previous generations, that the medical system was kind of there like a safety net to save us. And there was like, we had hopes for pharmaceuticals and surgical procedures and so on that would be there to save us if we encountered ill health. And as our awareness increases, we're discovering that this is not necessarily the case. And we have the privilege of a very modern, advanced medical system. It isn't necessarily saving us in the way that we thought. And as such, it's so much more important for us to be informed and to be advocates for our health.
Absolutely. Especially when, you know, as we age, now the baby boomers everybody's getting older, and we've come up through the ranks sort of with this idea of, but just take a pill and you'll be fine. And that's not necessarily the case, because the pill could have all these side effects and all these problems and could cause all these issues that, well, then now you got to take another pill. Well, and there we go, you know, so that's why we need to do our own homework, our own research, and work on our own health and nutrition to help prevent these problems and to manage our health ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think there's, you know, it used to be like 40 is the new 30. And I think we're recognizing that even 50 it doesn't, in our minds, it's not as old as it would have been for previous generations, because we're also understanding, you know, I continue to like be fascinated by and marvel at the human body and its ability to not only to like endure years of kind of misuse, but the ability to adapt and to respond to positive inputs even later in life, when we start to think about like, oh, maybe I'm over the hill, or maybe it's too late for me. And it's actually quite remarkable how well the body will continue to respond when we give it healthy inputs. And I know you mentioned that you work with mature women. Perhaps we could sort of define what that might look like for you and sort of what your client base tends to look like. But just this idea that, hey, you know, 50 or whatever the number happens to be, it's not quite as old as we might have thought it was in our minds, because we recognize if we take our health into our hands, that we can actually quite powerfully, positively impact our health and regain a degree of youthfulness that we thought maybe wasn't previously possible.
That's so true. And especially for women, mature women, as we want to say, and that could be anybody for 40, 45, 50, maturing in age, empty nesting, college kids leaving home, now what do I do kind of thing. What do I do financially? What do I do with my free time now that I have? What do I do with my career? Do I want a second career? I never really liked this job. Now maybe it's a time for me to go do something else. Now maybe it's a time for me to be an entrepreneur. But it's definitely a time to pay attention to our health, and we start to feel it more. And we've got the snap, crackle, pop in our knees, and that's telling us, what do we need to do about that? And what do we do about this extra weight that I'm putting on now with menopause? How do I combat that? What's metabolism? What's my hormone level? What does all that mean? What do I need to ask my doctor? What tests do I need to have run?
Mm-hmm. Really, and a really important question there. What do I need to ask my doctor? I think it's incredibly important that, again, I'm a coach as well, but that we educate our clients and give them the tools and the encouragement needed to be their advocates, because sometimes the medical system can be quite a daunting, behemoth to face. And there's this fear of, of course, our medical professionals are highly educated. They're very, very well educated. And asking questions isn't a challenge to their education or professional status, but rather a greater desire to understand. And we are going into this more informed. We are no longer in this era of, well, the doctor knows best and I don't know anything. It's, I actually have a degree of understanding, probably enough to be just enough to be problematic, but really to cause the doctors to have to dig a little bit deeper in terms of the answers that we might get as well. And given how sort of burdened our medical system is, health has never been more important, because that sort of medical safety net that we thought was there is under a lot of strain and may even break at some point in time in the near future. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think I heard something like for the US, like it might be like 40% of GDP expenditure is going into healthcare, which is boggles my mind when I hear that figure.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in your experience, when you do end up working with mature women, what do you find is, because I want to put it this way. I often look at things like weight loss and nutrition coaching and even fitness coaching and things like that. They're really the cover story. They're the cover story for something else. What is it when someone comes to you, and maybe they come to you saying, "Hey, I want to lose some weight," or whatever. But really, what is it that these women are looking for when they come to work with you?
They're looking for ways to fight procrastination. They're looking for ways to fight depression. They're looking for ways to increase self-esteem, because all those things go into our body,
Mm-hmm.
and what we do to our body, and what our brain is saying, what our self-talk is saying. What do we see when we look in the mirror? What is there negative self-talk? Are we self-aware? Are we taking care of our mental health? And all that goes together. And of course, mental health awareness is such a big thing right now. And I'm so glad we're talking about it out in the open.
Mm-hmm.
You can even get therapy online now. BetterHelp is, you can get a therapist online now. So that's amazing. And in a good way that we're talking about it. But most of the physical issues come from the mental issues.
Absolutely.
That's just the beginning.
And you said something earlier, and some folks might have missed it, but it's at this stage in life, what's next? So mm-hmm. maybe the challenging years of raising a family, for example, or some of the years of sort of slogging at the bottom of the barrel in terms of a career and working your way up, or things like that. Like those are behind you. You're not yet advanced in age or a senior citizen or things like that. You don't necessarily have the youthfulness, but there's like this door of possibility that's waiting. There's more life to be lived. And so there's this desire, well, what comes next now that I've sort of ticked all these boxes that maybe I was supposed to tick, and I'm still looking for something. And I wonder, what sort of answers you get from your clients in that regard.
Sometimes looking for a second career to do what they want to do, their passion. A lot of that revolves around entrepreneurship, starting their design business, starting their clothing line, opening up their cake shop, There's a ton of that going on. And a lot of women-owned businesses are starting that way. A lot of women-owned businesses have started since the pandemic. So they're, you know, getting out of the workforce and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I can control my own destiny. I can control my own finances. I can control my own business and do what I love and what I really want to do, and the dream, or, something I've thought about, and just do it. And that's very freeing and amazingly happening right now.
Yeah, which is remarkable to see. I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurship. It is not an easy road. I think sometimes it gets painted with a degree of glamour that it's maybe undeserving of, because there is a lot of work that goes into actually running a successful business for a sustained period of time, when that initial excitement dies down. And maybe there's some parallels in people's health journeys as well. We encounter this sort of initial stage of excitement, and as that wanes, how do we create sustained health as time goes on? Now, I want to shift gears a little bit here as we dive more into your own individual story. As much as, obviously as a coach, I'm very passionate about the work of coaching and health and things like that. And so it's great to know that this is a field that you're in as well. But I want to explore more of your own individual story. If you just tell us a little bit about where was it that you grew up, and kind of what was life like for you growing up?
I grew up as an only child, primarily in Sarasota, Florida. I graduated from Sarasota High School, and we rode our bikes around the neighborhood looking for each other and finding friends down the street. Where are the bikes in the yard? Well, that's where the kids are. Okay, I'm going to park my bike there and go see if the kids are out back. What are they doing?
And I love this because, of course, sometimes it's hard to imagine life without the internet and life without instant communication and so on. But I'm a child of the 80s. You're a child of the 70s, I guess, give or take. And this idea of, like, we didn't have cell phones. Maybe we didn't use even phones all that often. So I was like, hey, I want some companionship. I'm going to hop on my bike and ride around and see if there's bikes in the yard. There's probably kids playing there. So that's where I'm going to go and play. And play happened outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Especially in Florida, we were outside all the time. And that thing about when the street lights came on, then it was time to come home. Or, your mom would stand out in the driveway and just yell your name. And then it was time to come home, so. Nope.
And, now as a parent, of course, to me, that's fascinating, sort of that level of freedom that children have. And I'm a father of a toddler, and I've got another one on the way, and I'm trying to sort of strike a balance here, because it's thinking about the internet and just the level of awareness that we have of potential, like, hazards and safety risks and things like that, and that exist nowadays. And maybe it feels like it's greater because the stories come out more and more, and they can be spread faster and be more sensationalized and so on. But I recall, the same sort of idea. Like, we just went and played with the kids in the neighborhood, rode our bikes up the street or whatever. Mom and dad are like, yeah, be home for dinner at like 5. Kind of thing. And that was that. There was no cell phones. There was no whatever. It was like, and if we didn't come home at 5, okay, well, now maybe we get a little bit worried, but I don't sort of see that level of freedom sort of existing today. So I love that you shared that as a childhood memory, because I think it was a really kind of a neat time in our society.
Completely different. Yes.
And so after high school, you ended up going to, I think is it West Point?
Yes.
West Point Academy, which is a U.S. military academy. And this would have been back in the 1980s, if I'm getting my timeline correct.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Now, I would imagine that in the 1980s, there probably wasn't as many women going into the military. They were obviously a part of the military, but my impression would be, I spent 6 years in the Canadian military, and we had plenty of women. But I'm kind of imagining that maybe there weren't so many back then. What prompted you to join the military in the first place?
I was in the ROTC in high school, and my parents pretty much told me, either you get an ROTC scholarship or you get accepted to one of the academies. That's the only way you're getting a college education. So figure it out. Okay. Yeah. So in preparing for college, I had started preparing in 7th and 8th grade and taking the right classes and doing the right thing and all that sort of thing to make sure that I had the right resume, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And then with the ROTC really helped a lot. And I had, another part of my resume finished with that. And so I applied for the ROTC scholarships, and I applied for, West Point and the Air Force Academy. I was declined from the Air Force Academy primarily because of my vision. Mm-hmm. And then I received an Air Force ROTC scholarship to Duke University in computer science. And I was tentative about that. And then the West Point acceptance letter came in, and I was like, oh, that's it. Hallelujah, I'm going there. I had no idea what I was getting into. None
Right.
whatsoever.
I was thinking, I mean, I think in the US, there's a different perception of the military and service in the military than there is, say, in Canada. I mean, it's respected and whatnot here, but the military seems to hold such a different like presence in the American psyche in terms of what it is and its ability. Of course, because America for the U.S. for a long time has been really like a superpower with a kind of a dominant military force and so on. And it's and so there's kind of this different perception about it. But going into it, I mean, other than, hey, this is a route to me getting a college degree sort of thing, did you have any sort of aspirations militarily, or was it purely like, hey, this is a transactional relationship where I get what I need and I get out?
Oh no, because I've been in the ROTC, I thought it was really cool. And I
Okay.
wanted to be an officer, and I was going to be an officer, and I was going to stay in, and I was going to make colonel, and gosh, maybe I'll even be a general, and the whole thing. And then children happened, and Desert Storm happened, and so the plans were changed. But no, from the get go, I wanted to definitely be an officer, and I was very straight and together. And as my West Point sisters remind me now, I was very strapped and very strict and very straight laced, and
Yeah.
just we had to do the right thing. Go and go, and yeah. And they found, and some of them actually said I was scary. And now they see me and they're like, oh my gosh, you're such a hippie. What happened?
Right, right. It's funny how life can change us. And it was at West Point that you met your husband. And
Yeah.
how did you meet? And I guess who approached who about the prospect of this becoming a relationship?
Well, we met through friends at the dance hall, so to speak, and we had Friday night and Saturday night dances, and we were allowed to drink this watered down near beer.
Right, right.
And so we had that time, and we kind of hung out and met each other through friends, and then we started dating. We broke up for a little while, and we started dating again. Then things went pretty well, and he asked me to marry him in September of our senior year, and I said yes. And then called off the wedding 3 times between then and graduation, and getting cold feet. My parents didn't want me to get married. Oh, you're too young. You're too young. Go be an officer. Go do your thing. That'll happen later, kind of thing.
Right, right.
So, but yeah. So, and it was fine. We had a great relationship. We had our son right away.
Yeah.
In Fort Polk, Louisiana. So.
Right. And so when you get cold feet, thankfully my wife never got cold feet. We had the wedding at the date that we had set. But what sort of goes through your mind that prompts you to, hey, I need to call this off because what is cold feet, or what was it for you?
I was too young. I had not been with anyone else. I was very inexperienced in the love relationships, boyfriends. I had not had boyfriends in high school. They thought that my parents thought that he was too old for me, and he was too experienced and too advanced, and that I needed to wait, and kind of cool my jets, so to speak, and not rush into anything.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, as an only child, that's the only opinion I have is my parents, and it's very important to me to please them and make that happen and be okay with that. But then a little rebellion took over, and I'm like, no, this is what I'm going to do. And so I rebelled and got commissioned one day and got married the next.
Right, right. And if I'm asked, and of course, we're framing this in light of your experience and how things changed for you in your 40s. But what was it that maybe attracted you to this gentleman that you said, hey, this is like I'm looking forward to. I want to be married to this man.
Well, he's a good-looking man, very good-looking man. Again, a little bit older, more mature, and a good student, very smart, super smart. Very together, very wanted to have a military career. Again, he was driven. He had been enlisted before. He came to the school to be an officer, to graduate from West Point. It was very important to him. He was, so it would, we were going to make a great power couple.
Right.
So,
right.
he was loving. He was kind. He was very patient with me and my wobbling back and forth, and the parents, and being an only child and not having a lot of relationships. He understood that this was a lot. So.
Absolutely. And then your first child came along, and that led to your, I guess, release from the military.
That was the second, my
Oh, second.
daughter. Then, yeah, my son was 3.5 when
Okay.
Desert Storm came around. So then I was pregnant with her, and I said, I cannot give her, away and go join my unit and be gone for a year. I've got two very small children. And I was like, no, I'm going to maternity out. Thank you very much. I really wanted to stay in. I really wanted to have the career, but it wasn't meant to be that way because so I got out and had my daughter outside in the civilian world.
Right. Yeah. And I applaud that step, because I think motherhood now, and maybe it's particularly like prescient for me right now because my wife is pregnant with her second child, and I get to witness every day her just being this incredible mom. Like it's this beautiful thing, really. So I have great admiration for motherhood, and so and perhaps your kids are grateful that you also decided to stay with them through their younger years, and they got more of you, I guess, in their life as a result of that. So as you transitioned out of the military, did you start a second career? Were you a stay-at-home mom for a period of time, or what did that look like for you?
I went right into retail,
Mhm.
went right into Target. Um, my husband had gotten out and he had joined Target as well.
Mhm.
So that's when we were in Houston, Texas. Houston was in Houston.
Yeah, yeah.
And we went to Florida for Target. Target was opening up all of Florida, the department store. And so we've been in Florida ever since.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And so that's my story was 30 years of retail.
Okay, and you then have some behind the scenes kind of experience just in terms of like we all just walk into a store and like go and pick something off the shelf and go to the cashier or whatever and complain about something or other, um, probably you have some rather unique insights into this and into the industry as a whole. And like I think about it now, like as a business owner, having a company that like maintains these giant sort of warehouse type spaces and stock and things like that. Like there's a lot that goes into the running of a retail store. And
Mhm.
Target, I guess, is still going strong down in the U.S. They tried to make a dance into the Canadian market, and it might have lasted 2 years before kind of flaming out. But I mean, Canada's population is about the same as California's, so um, we're just a logistically challenging like country to try and put retail stores into, I guess. But what about that did you enjoy the most? What challenged you?
Um, it it was always changing, but yet it was the same.
Mhm.
So you're changing out your displays, you're changing out your stuff. That's always changing, but your seasons don't change. You've still, you've got back to school season, you've got Halloween, you've got Christmas. And so where you put the Christmas trees may be different each year, but you're still going to put the Christmas trees up. It got earlier every year, but
Right, right,
so we put the Christmas trees up in September now, but
yeah,
um, the same yet different. So it,
yeah,
it was a lot of change, a lot of flexibility. If this doesn't come in, what am I going to put here? I'm
hmm,
experiencing the growing of technology, the handheld computers now that they use for inventory and stock. That was just coming. The automated registers of scanning and not having to type in, all the
right,
automation was happening right in that during that time. Um, so that was very exciting. We were automating how we were stocking, sell a case, get a case, all that software behind the scenes technology, calculating how much freight you needed, when you needed it, lead times, and all that
no kidding,
stuff now that we take for granted now because it's just
right,
super technology now. Walmart and Target both have it down to a science, and of course, Amazon just blew them all away with
right,
with their technology and how they have it down to a science.
right,
Um,
right.
and the distribution, delivery and all that. So
Hmm.
um, I'm still with Bed Bath and Beyond part time.
Okay, yeah,
I work there a couple days a week.
yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, like you had a background in the military in logistics as well, and so I think that again that maybe carries over a little bit into kind of what you're doing. Although, if I understand right, this is more like a marketing thing, and so there's a lot of thought that must go into like the experience that somebody has when they walk through the doors of a store. I think like Walmart has their greeter, like that's a classic sort of Walmart thing. You get greeted, and then do you need this or whatever? Or can I direct you and so on? So there's this experience and the first thing that you see in terms of display and products and things like that, and as you sort of navigate the store, did you have to kind of plan all of that out? Like what is the experience for the customer that walks through the door?
Um, it was pretty much headquarters generated in the larger companies, like
Right, yeah,
the Targets, the Staples, the larger companies. That's all corporate generated. They send you a map of your floor plan, and it's color coded, and you map it all out, and you hand it out, and here go set. Set your ad here, set this. So that was very pre-planned and corporate bought. But when you move to a company like Linens and Things, who went out of business, or Bed Bath and Beyond, who's struggling, it was self-directed by the store manager. So the store manager chose their displays and bought their own products.
Right.
And in doing so, you put the company into a lot of liability, or you put the company into a huge growth and sales. Linens and Things would take a product from Shark Tank and blow it out of the water.
Right.
They couldn't keep up. I mean, we would sell hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of this shark sponge daddy thing that came on Shark Tank. So whatever came on Shark Tank, Linens and Things and Bed Bath & Beyond bought it. And they bought it big, huge. And the little company couldn't keep up. And they're like, oh
no. That's quite, I never would have thought about that. But I suppose even if something maybe didn't get like investors on Shark Tank, they still get like the exposure, and maybe someone comes along and says, hey, we'd like to have you produce this thing here. And so all along the way, so you have this corporate career in retail. You've got your family. Did you have 2 children, or were there more?
No, just the 2. Just one boy, one girl. Done.
You got yourself a pigeon pair, and then you said, okay, that's it, we're done. Yeah. And things are going along well in your marriage. Like you described your husband as, he seemed like just a really fantastic individual, like loving, dedicated, good man, all this sort of thing. But at some point in time, I guess there was obviously this kind of like a stirring inside of you that something doesn't feel right, or something isn't lining up. What was kind of taking place for you?
It was more of a bolt of lightning.
Okay.
Than a stirring. The bolt of lightning happened when I was training with Kmart, and I was training in Chicago, and a particularly beautiful woman was hitting on me, and I didn't really realize it at first. It took me 2 weeks to figure it out, and then the next 2 weeks I was like, okay, what do I do with this? And I didn't pick up on the signals. I didn't pick up on the cues until it was just all too late. And it was like goodbye in the airport, and I was never going to see this woman again. She was going back to her home. I was going back to my home. We were going to go work for Kmart separately on other sides of the country, and I was devastated that I wasn't going to see her again. And it was just, I sat on the airplane, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I like women. Oh no, now what do I do?
Right. So now this is really fascinating in a sense, because you've been in this marriage for, at this point in time, would that be like 25 or so years?
29. 20, about 25. About 25. You're right. Yeah.
Okay. And so in a marriage of 25 years, you're pretty sure that you love your husband. It seems like, I'm sure you had ups and downs, like sort of any couple does.
Sure.
But if for all intents and purposes in your mind at this point, you're heterosexual. Is that right? Like you didn't see yourself as, like, this wasn't something that really entered your consciousness?
It did not. It did not. And again, red flags my entire life. Women have always hit on me. And I was like, no, I'm not attracted to you. No, I am not a lesbian. What is wrong with you? I am married. I have children. Go away.
Right.
I'll be your friend. So one of my very best friends is a lesbian in Phoenix, Arizona. And I call her when I get back from Chicago, from Kmart. And I'm like, oh my gosh, Alicia, I like women. She goes, duh. Why do you think I was hitting on you 20 years ago? And I'm like, well, I didn't know it. And she's like, what happened? Tell me what happened. How do you know? So I told her the stories, and she's like, oh my gosh.
Right. Yeah.
You're in trouble now.
So in your mind, previously when this sort of interaction had happened, you had dismissed it, but this particular interaction seemed to awaken it, I guess, as you mentioned. It's like as a lightning bolt. And so now all of a sudden, like your world is kind of thrown into upheaval, because you go,
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is obviously in hindsight, but in hindsight, would you look back and say maybe there was this tendency before, but you weren't aware that this was a possibility? Or is this something that can change over time?
I think that it was probably always a possibility, but I hadn't had an attraction.
Mm-hmm.
There was no physical attraction. I think that if I had met someone that attractive younger, I would have known sooner, kind of thing. I think that there was no attraction to any of these other women,
Right.
and so I'm like, no, I'm not attracted to you.
Yeah, I guess
No,
there would be no real
yeah,
awakening, so to speak, because there wasn't
no,
actually an attraction there.
right.
So this incident in Chicago happens. You go back home, or you're on the plane, and you go back home, and now what kind of conversation do you have with your husband at the time?
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, nope. Just push that down. Just push that down. Yep. Two kids are still one's in high school, one's in college. We're upside down on the house. Can't sell the house, can't get a divorce, got the kids. Nope, push that down.
Okay.
And then till I was 50. And
Yeah.
then the reawakening again at 50 and kind of the midlife crisis, so to speak. And then I say, okay, I've got to do something about this because this is not healthy. I'm not happy. It's inside of me all the time. And so I go out and visit the friend in Phoenix, Arizona. And she takes me on the lesbian circuit. And I get all the advice from all the lesbian, around the neighborhood. And basically, they said, have you talked to your husband? Have you told him I'm not happy? Have you told him I think I'm a lesbian? They all were in agreement. You have got to go talk to your husband and you've got to figure this out and you've got to figure it out together. And you can't just go home and ask for a divorce.
That's like remarkably good good advice. Like
very mature, yeah.
Like be considerate of the other person you've been in a relationship with for
right.
30 years at this point in time. That's very thoughtful of them. Okay, and that's, the term seems kind of funny that you got taken on the, I think it's the lesbian circuit. So she has all her friends here, and they come along, and and you're having these conversations with these women. And what sort of other insights did you get that maybe surprised you or really stood out to you?
The interaction of other women. She had she's been a lesbian since she was 12, and she had no hetero friends at all, none. I mean, the only people that she knew that were heteros were men that worked for her in her construction business.
Right.
She owned her own business, and she was an architect. So the only people that she knew that were married with children were men that worked for her in her construction business, or electrical engineers, or plumbers, or whatever. So it was a little bit of a skewed view, and I'm like, okay, you have no hetero friends? Nope. No. Why would I? And I was like, okay. And then just the different types of women, the different styles of women, you've got the stereotypes of the short hair and the butchy looking women. You've got the beautiful femme looking women who you would walk past going down the street, and you would not know that they were lesbian or think that they were lesbian or care or whatever. And it was all different types, motorcycle riders, all kinds of stuff. And that was very intriguing. That there's just so many different types of women, and different styles and different, whatever you want to call them. And everybody had a name and like a title and
a term or
a term, right? Butch, femme, sporty, butch. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Right. Which is kind of funny. I mean, we probably have it. I mean, I guess I wouldn't even think about it, but we probably have it in hetero terms as well. But and so of course it makes sense. What's also kind of interesting to me is I think sometimes there's this perceived maybe animosity between, I guess, hetero and homosexual like cliques, I guess, if you will. But it seems like that there doesn't actually have to be, but maybe it comes from a perceived sense of what I say, like a threat or something like that. Like, like if you become my friend, are you going to influence me in one way or another, or is this person influencing you, and so on and so forth. But it seems like from like what you're describing here, this is something that was like very innate, like kind of wired into you, just hadn't been awakened. Is that an accurate sentiment?
Yes, I think it was very freeing to finally actually be able to say it, to come out to my husband, to say I want to date women, to actually start dating women was a whole another process because I was still married.
Right. And if I may ask, like, what sort of conversation happens with your husband at the time? And I mean, how was it received?
Well, not well. He was completely floored. I told him, I said, I'm a lesbian. I want a divorce. I'm not dating anybody. I've not cheated on you. I'm not having an affair. nothing has happened, but I know that this is the way I truly am. And he was very quiet. At first I had the I'm not happy talk, because then I had the I'm not happy talk. I had that talk 6 months earlier. Nothing changed. I mean, absolutely nothing. And then I had okay, I'm really not happy. This is why. Let's really get to the story. And he thought about it. And he went out and did his job for a couple of days and processed. And I was quiet and let him process. I know that's how men work. I've been with him long enough to know that's how he works. So he processed and he came back and he said, all right, let's give it a try. I said, give what a try? He said, well, let's try the marriage. And I said, well, I still want to date women. Okay, let's see how that works out. And I'm like, what? You gotta be kidding me. He says, I do not want to get a divorce. We are not getting a divorce. This is not happening. A lot of denial, going on then, obviously. But and then it took a while to find anybody that would even date me, because I was still married.
So. And was he still wanting to maintain a relationship with you?
Oh, yes, very much so. Very much so. He stepped up his game in the bedroom quite significantly. And that was interesting. But I still want to date women. So, okay. And then I actually found a woman, a girlfriend, and we were together for about 2 years. Had her over to the house for Christmas dinner. She came over for parties. She was no threat at all to the marriage. He knew that. She knew that. I didn't know that, but
right.
They knew that.
So, and this also, I mean, it's kind of a fascinating dynamic, a relational dynamic, so to speak, because you're you're still maintaining this marriage at this point. If you now have a girlfriend, do you decide that, hey, because I have this girlfriend, we're no longer going to be intimate, or was there sort of maintaining of both intimate relationships for a period of time, or how did that kind of play out?
Maintain both.
Yeah.
Absolutely maintained both. He was very adamant about that. There was going to be no threesomes, three ways, no three nothing, but there was definitely, we were going to maintain our bedroom, and then I maintained, not separately. We would go out and do things in hotel rooms, or I'd go to her house or whatever.
And I wonder, and of course this is just me speculating, but I wonder, was he hoping that maybe it would be that you were bisexual and that you could maintain both relationships and somehow keep the marriage, or how did that sort of progress as time went on?
I think that he was in denial basically the entire time.
Okay.
So, looking back on it now, of course, but I think that he didn't think I was going to get a girlfriend in the first place. Then he didn't think that that obviously we weren't going to work out, which is what happened. We didn't work out for about 2 years of instruction. And then she went back to a hetero relationship that she had been in previously. So then there was that. And then, okay, so that's over with. All right, fine. I knew that wasn't going to work out. He's saying this to himself. I knew that wasn't going to work out. So, okay. But I'm still out dating women, and I date a few more women. And then I find my wife, who I'm with now. And that was tremendous and amazing for both of us. She was married in a 30-year marriage as well, with 2 children. And she had known her entire life, but pushed it down due to her hetero norms. But she'd been in a couple relationships. Her husband knew about it, was, again, no three ways or threesomes, but you do your thing. And so she did her thing, I did my thing, and then we found each other online. And then it was, now what? Then it was really, really hard to maintain the marriages, because we just wanted to be together all the time, and it was very difficult. There was a seriously hard year of trying to figure it out.
Right. Yeah. No kidding. And of course you're doing this because I look at it. I think about this from like the perspective of even the human brain. And I think you've had 30 plus years of certain patterns and certain conditioning and all of this, and it's all sort of getting unwired in a very short window of time. And it might sound strong to use language like this, but it's almost like there's an element of trauma to this, because you're disrupting maybe a structure of life and a belief system that you've had for such a long period of time in a relatively short window of time. Like you wrestled with it, I guess, now it sounds like we're maybe 5 to 7 years that sort of wrestling with this kind of thing. So there was kind of a window of time, but nonetheless, then there comes like the break where it's like, okay, this is it. We have to part ways. And
Yeah.
when your husband realized that, okay, this is kind of final, how did that play out for you?
Very difficult. Was very difficult. A lot of anger, resentment, jealousy, grief. Because basically you're grieving a relationship of 30 years, that, the death of a relationship, so to
Right.
speak.
Yeah.
A lot of denial. I asked for a divorce again. No, we're not getting divorced. And he just kept thinking I was coming back.
Right. Right.
And once I moved, that she and I moved again, and we moved to St. Petersburg, which is our gayest of gay community in Florida, the gayest zip codes ever. So we moved to our bubble.
Yeah.
And once we moved to St. Petersburg, he was pretty much like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I think this is really happening now.
Mhm.
And so, we're coming up on our 4th anniversary, she and I, and 2 years of it completely separate together.
Mhm.
And a year and a half we dated, and then almost 2.5 years completely separated. And so I asked him for a divorce again, and he said, okay.
And
And I
was
sent the
there an
paperwork.
element of like grief on your end as well for the marriage and time spent in the marriage? And maybe it looks a little bit different. Maybe it comes from a different perspective. But despite all of this, like, did you still feel a sense of like maybe love and affection for this man and like who he was?
Yes. And that made it even more difficult too. He made it a little easier with his behavior and his some of his temperament and some of the things that were going on. He made it a little easier to leave.
Mm-hmm.
But overall,
Yeah.
still, the father of children, my son-in-law to my mother, he still visits my mother. There's still that bond.
Yeah.
It's not nearly as strong as it was. We don't nearly have as much in common. We don't really have that much to talk about. I mean, we tried to go out to dinner one time, and it was kind of a social disaster. And I think we both realizing, okay, no, we got
Right.
nothing here.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And how does that work for family gatherings? I guess like if there's gonna be holiday gatherings, and the kids are coming back or whatever. How does that end
Well,
up?
well, we haven't had any births, deaths, or funerals or
Okay.
marriages yet, so I don't know. Um,
Fair enough.
yeah, it's very small family again. I only had 2 children. I'm an only child. My mother is an only child. So on
Mm-hmm.
our side of the family, very small family. Um, my son graduated from college in Connecticut and got his master's degree in fine arts. And we were both supposed to go, my husband and I. And at the last minute, he didn't go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm, okay.
Yeah.
He paid half for the trip. He paid for his half for the hotel, a rental car and the whole thing. But just at the very last minute, didn't go. And I'm like, not surprised. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, um,
So thinking about, and of course, a lot of this again is hindsight, and we have that phrase that hindsight is 2020. But you look
yeah.
back over his pattern of behavior as sort of the relationship was drawing to a close, and it sounds dramatic, but the relationship's kind of in its death throes,
Mm-hmm.
and you look at like how he was conducting himself, trying to deal with all the different emotions that he was kind of going through. And I imagine, like, so if he was older than you, does that place him in his 50s and maybe going to his 60s at this point in time, or where
Yes.
that, yeah.
Yes. He's 63.
And so when we look at that and we think about the era that he grew up in as well, where men really didn't have the freedom to feel, experience, process, and so on, and anger really becomes like there's certain quote unquote masculine emotions that were safe for like men to express. He didn't have the freedom to maybe express so much like the grief, the sadness, the softer emotions, if you will. And so they come out expressed in this way instead. When you look back, does it seem like, okay, now I understand like him doing that? And while it's obviously not a behavior that was comfortable or ideal, it's at least understandable why it was taking place.
Oh yeah, I had a therapist through this entire process,
Mm-hmm.
and I encouraged him to get one on several occasions because he doesn't have anybody to talk to about this stuff.
Right.
So while we're going through all this, I was in therapy once a week during those days, and of course she was helping me deal with him because he's not in therapy. So this is what he's doing. And this is, you've got to see where you're causing what you're saying. If he's grieving or this is anger or lashing out, and she was helping me see the behavior as, oh, okay. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I see that.
Right.
So when you say this, it's going to spiral this. Oh, right. Okay. Don't say that.
Right. So you kind of start to make sense of it. And there's not exactly a direct parallel. I went through a traumatic experience a little over 10 years ago, and going to trauma counseling helped me to understand like everything I experienced, and times where I would behave in a manner that I felt like it wasn't actually like me and didn't make sense to me, yet the behavior was kind of happening. There's this strange sort of dissociation. But I guess the point of this being, having that understanding at least helped me to show myself a little bit of grace as I was trying to process some of the emotions of like what I had been through, because I then didn't just pin it on, I must just actually be this terrible person. They started to make sense. Like, again, the behaviors weren't ideal. They weren't necessarily good or healthy behaviors, but at least I understood where they were coming from. And so it made it a little easier to not just want to point it all at myself and say I'm the worst human being on the planet.
I love when you just said, give yourself some grace. That is a tremendous saying and a tremendous idea and tremendously difficult to do.
Yeah.
Because I had to give myself grace on why didn't I know sooner? How did I lead this family and lead this man down 30, 35 years of marriage? I coulda, woulda, shoulda it to death.
Right.
And,
yeah.
My therapist is like, you can't do that. You have to give yourself grace that you had to go through these steps. You couldn't just break. The process had to happen this way. And that's the only way you could do it. It wasn't ideal. It hurt and it hurt people and it wasn't ideal, but that was the only way you could do it, was that slow, like you said, death throes, that slow dragging out, for several years of the actual leaving.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And so as we close out, because I really appreciate your willingness to share very openly and vulnerability. I think it really, we as human beings, we read or listen to other people's stories, and we find elements of ourselves in those stories. And that's why I think storytelling is so important, and why I love this podcast. But I always like to ask my guests, if someone has listened to this conversation today, they've heard your story, what is one thing that you would like them to take away from this story?
Be true to yourself, whatever that means. It doesn't have to be sexual. It doesn't have to be lesbian, gay, whatever. Be true to yourself. As a father, as a mother, as a daughter, as a son. Be true to yourself as an entrepreneur, as a worker, as a manager, as a leader. Know your values, know your purpose, and stick to them. And be true to yourself, no matter what. That higher power of yourself is the most important.
I think you said something that, know your values, because the phrase "be true to yourself" gets used a lot, but I love that you've amplified that and said, here's what that actually looks like, to know and understand your values and to live your values. Well, Kathy, it's truly been a pleasure exploring your story today. Thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to when we get to chat again sometime in the future.
Thank you, John. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.